Welcome to the Trellix Spotlight series. My name is Nick, and I will be your host. Today's session will focus on endpoint security, or HX, and using real-time events for investigation. This webinar will be recorded. If you prefer not to participate in the recorded session, please feel free to disconnect at this time. A link to today's recorded presentation will be emailed to all registered attendees. This webinar is a brief overview covering common use cases and scenarios regarding this topic. It is not intended to be all-encompassing. If assistance is needed, please contact Trellix Technical Support. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the Q&A window. This webinar may run longer or shorter based on your participation, and we recommend asking as many questions as you can to make the most of this series. If the Q&A window is not displayed, click the tab at the bottom of your session window and click on the Q&A icon. We will answer the questions during the final section of this webinar. If you experience any audio issues during the webcast, please drop and attempt to reconnect. Our speaker today is Jeff Meacham. Jeff is a senior technical training instructor at Trellix. He's a seasoned professional specializing in XDR, endpoint investigations, alert analysis, and cyber threat hunting. With over 13 years of experience in the field, Jeff has played a vital role in developing global curricula and lab materials for leading organizations. Jeff's knowledge and insights have been recognized in the industry, as he's been invited to speak at notable events such as the Cybersecurity Defense Summit in 2021 and 2022's Expand Partner Summit. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff.
Hey, thanks so much for the introduction. All right, so in today's webinar, we're going to talk about how to use real-time events for investigations and how it makes our lives that much easier. So to kick things off, we're going to first talk about the HX detection engines and how that plays into the agent events. Next, we're going to go over how to perform a data acquisition using the HX, or more specifically, how do we get that data that we actually want to look at? And then after understanding the basics, we'll talk about those agent events, what they do, what their purpose is, and of course, we'll kick things off with a brief demo. Now, inside of the HX, there are 3 detection engines you should be aware of. So first, we have our exploit guard, which monitors commonly exploited applications, such as Microsoft products, such as Word or Excel, Outlook, which has been huge in the news this year. It'll also look at browser behavior as well, such as Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. So it will identify malicious behavior like a PDF file launching PowerShell. That's not something that we would typically expect to see. Or an Excel file that's connecting to domains besides Microsoft. Next, we have our malware protection detection engine. You'll see this appear as Malware Pro. Now, this does support operating side by side with most major antivirus products, though it might require a little bit of fine-tuning to allow it to process. But the malware protection is built into the agent. But the one that we're going to be focusing in on today is a real-time detection engine. Now, this engine will contain rules that are created by our Trellix IR teams and any custom rules that you guys might create in the web UI or via the API. And most of it will be recorded and shown inside of the agent events. In fact, in this next slide, this is our agent event storage. This is the file that the agent will create on your Windows, Mac, or Linux endpoints. Now, this is tied back to that real-time detection engine, meaning it's scanning the rules based on the Trellix rules from our IR teams and from your own rules. So if a rule is broken, we'll capture that live process and then be able to begin our investigation. Guys, tie over my shoulder. This is our secret sauce. This is our hole-in-one. This is our Michael Jordan with 30 seconds left in the game, down by 2, 3-point shot. This is our agent event storage. If you guys can understand and utilize the agent event storage, the world is your oyster. You will become amazing analysts. Your hometowns will have ticker tape parades and line the streets and chant your names because of what a great analyst you guys will become. So again, real-time events will happen around the time of the alert based off of the real-time detection engine. Basically, it's grabbing all process events, all the file write events, all the network changes, anything that recently changed because of an alert. And it's organizing it. And it's saying, these are the most important items that you need to look at. Now, keep in mind, you'll still have access to everything else that happened on the system. But these organized files and processes, these are going to contain some of the more interesting data. Now, on Windows, there are 8 key areas of the computer system that are recorded. We have our file events. So we will get a file write event anytime a file is written to. And all these events attempt to group all the writes to a single file within 15 seconds into a single event. Meaning, not only can we see the first byte from the lowest offset written to a file, but we can also grab the MD5 and identify what that file is. Next, we have our network events. So remember, attackers, they have to use the network in some way, either to send additional commands or download additional malware. So network connection events will happen anytime the host computer establishes a network connection, meaning we can gather what the process is, the process ID, the local and remote IP address, as well as the ports that are involved with this. So this is going to be very useful in identifying C2 communications. DNS events. These events will occur whenever the host computer makes a DNS request. This will capture the host name, process ID, and process, which is useful to identify if malware is communicating to malicious domains such as malware.com. Image load event. So that will happen whenever an executable or linked library is loaded into memory. So usually you'll see this in some kind of form of a DLL injection attack. Registry events. So registry key events, that will happen whenever a registry key or key value from a pre-configured list of keys commonly used for persistence is modified. All right, so for example, those run or run once keys, very useful for the attacker to modify, to create backdoors, or set their malware to be set on auto run. So if the attacker is modifying keys like that, we can capture that and we can see that. Process lifecycle event, so that will occur when the process starts or ends and will generate a process event if it starts while a process is running, as well as the process command line arguments. So if an attacker is using PowerShell or the command line or any process that uses the process command line, we can see exactly what the attacker is trying to do and what commands they're running. IP address change events, that'll happen whenever the IP address of the host system is changed, which you'll see attackers do for setting a static IP address on an endpoint to maintain their foothold. URL events, that will occur whenever a URL is accessed. So typically you'll see this in the form of a GET request for downloading additional malware or a POST request for data exfiltration. Now, on the Mac endpoint, it will record all of the same things except for the registry, because Apple computers, they just don't have a registry, and it will not capture URL events. And then for Linux, it will only record the network events and process lifecycle events. However, I want to reiterate, these are live. These are coming from the real-time detection engine, meaning that we'll still be able to grab all the other system processes, files, or network connections from the actual disk itself. But again, this is just a file that is created on the endpoint. This is what's organized saying, hey, this is the most interesting content around the time of this alert. Now, the default size of the ring buffer is 120 megabytes, but it can be expanded up to 500 megabytes. And the amount of loopback is variable. I mean, it's going to depend on the system activity, but generally it's a day. It could be more or less depending on the endpoint. So let's go ahead and take a look at a real world example. How can we make this applicable for ourselves? So here is a terrific scenario based on real malware that our IR teams are seeing out in the wild. That is to say that the Rakakuni malware that can really be everything, everywhere, all at once. So our job is we are reviewing a list of tickets that have been assigned to us. An analyst has assigned a network-based alert to you and included some relevant IOCs in the ticket. Our job in this webinar is to review the alert and confirm it as a true positive. So before we do that, we need to perform a data acquisition on that infected machine, meaning we need to grab the actual data and investigate it using our tools. Now, we do have built-in scripts for quick specific acquisitions like PowerShell artifacts, PowerShell history, command shell history, and you can see that we also have scripts called GIM and GP test here. Now, I'm not going to cover all of these scripts. That's not the purpose of the webinar. And you guys need to keep this more secret than I am, but I do not know what that GIM script does. But two of the more common scripts that fit in today's scopes are the standard investigative details triage, which is going to give us the most important information quickly. And then we have our comprehensive investigative details triage, which is going to take a much longer time to grab everything, but you'll grab everything on the disk itself. However, because we have our agent events, I think for today's demo, just electing to do the standard investigative details will be sufficient. So this is what it would look like in the real world. We would go to our acquisitions. We would then click View Data Acquisition. So that way we'd be popped over right into Audit Viewer. Or we could download the full triage and then view it in Redline. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this inside of Audit Viewer. I'm going to go ahead and close this and hopefully, yep, okay, I do have it open up right over here. So this is inside of Audit Viewer. You can see we've already processed our data acquisition, and we are currently looking at the data from the acquisition. So I'm going to come over here to our wonderful agent events and click on the drop-down menu. And here we can see all of those terrific agent events that we have already talked about to this point. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to walk us through a quick, simple investigation based off our scenario that we've already talked about. So to kick things off, I'm going to come over to my process events. Now, I want to look for that Rakakuni process, right? So I'll come over to my process name column right here. And you can see that I have already entered in my filter. The reason being is I didn't think it would be that interesting for you guys to watch me type out Rakakuni every time. And even then, I'm not even 100% sure how to spell that. So by putting in contains RACC, I'm sure that's really going to narrow down what processes could be found on here. Now, something immediately sticks out to me right here. So I do see this rakakuni.pdf.exe. So I think that maybe the attacker was using a double extension to hide or try to hide what they were doing. I can see what the process command line is right here, and I can see the parent process name. Now, what I want to know is what else did Rakakuni get up to? So I'm going to take this filter off. And instead of looking at it in the process name column, I'm going to come over to the parent process name. Wonderful. So now I see a lot more of what's going on. In this process name column, these would be the child processes of the Rakakuni process. Looking over here at the process command line, I can see what these child processes got up to. Here's something that looks a little interesting just right off the bat. I can see this notepad. I can see who am I. This looks like, yep, it is scheduling some kind of task. That's pretty interesting. But I also want to see, okay, did Rakakuni connect out to the network? Is there any evidence of command and control activity? So I'm coming over to my network events. And again, for that process name, I'll go ahead and filter out for the Rakakuni. And I can see the remote IP addresses this process is connecting out to. That's pretty suspicious. We don't just expect a random process running from our downloads directory to be making outbound network calls. All right, I want to know what these IP addresses are, what they correspond to. There's a few ways I could do it. I could come over to my DNS lookup event. I could use other third-party tools to verify these IP addresses, such as Whois, for example. But let's come over to our DNS events. I'm going to filter out for that Rakakuni process, and that gives me a lot of information right here. So I can see it connected to Apple, the Earth, Contoso, and Microsoft. So right now, my hypothesis is maybe it's connecting out to Microsoft as a way to try to remain quiet or throw off the analyst. But by using our agent events, looking at what is going on during this time of the alert, we're able to see that, you know, maybe these other websites, maybe they're not all they appear to be. All right, I also want to know if Rakakuni wrote any files. I'll come over to my file write events. I can go ahead and filter out for that. All right, wonderful. I do see that Rakakuni wrote this putty.exe, this pwn.txt, this log file, and this other random txt file. Now, I do see that it wrote putty. That seems kind of weird. I could grab this hash. I could put it in VirusTotal. I could verify this really is putty. But maybe Rakakuni downloaded some of these files. Maybe Rakakuni downloaded putty. We did see it was making outbound network connection events. So I'm going to come over to my URL monitor events. And I want to see exactly what Rakakuni got up to. All right, so I do see when it ran. I do see a few GET requests. That is interesting. Oh, and then looking right here, it does look like we found the putty.exe, and we can see where it was downloaded from, the earth.li. So that earlier network connection event is now pointing to what the attacker is trying to do. All right, so next I'm going to go ahead and check out the registry key events. Now, the reason being is because the attacker, they might be wanting to set a back door for them, so that way it automatically opens every time the user logs in, or maybe they're trying to set their malware to auto run without any user interference. Plus, we're tracking this process. We want to see all the different areas of our endpoint that it might have gotten up to. So the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to come over to my key path. I'm going to go ahead and filter for my run keys, as well as the location of those. So looking over here, I do see several different run keys that were modified at this time. Let's go ahead and narrow it down just a little bit more. I'm going to come over to my process name, filter for Rakakuni, and boom. Okay, so I do have this run key that will run every time the user logs in. So probably a backdoor of some kind, as well as this run once key, which will run the one time and then self-delete. I can then look at the details and get more information about what the attacker is trying to accomplish. In the case of this run once, I can see that they modified the value name to be boop. And the text data looks like that is encoded, so we would have to use another tool in order to read and verify what the attacker is trying to accomplish. That pretty much would end up my investigation here. Now, obviously, over here on the left-hand side, there are a lot of different items that we just didn't talk about, like prefetch files or the file system. What is this persistence? Browser, URL history, so on and so forth. That is not part of this webinar, unfortunately. So for all of those that are looking to kind of get a deeper insight into how we perform our investigations, I highly recommend that you take one of our alert analysis courses where we do go into more depth about each of these different areas within our data acquisition. Where else can we find additional data? More information we have, the better off that we will be. All right, that was a quick Jeff tangent. I apologize. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our enterprise search. So we're going to use enterprise search as a way to ask all of the agents, hey, does this malware exist on your endpoint? Now, I already went ahead and did the search, right? You can see that I did it 21 hours ago. I just didn't want us to have to wait like 10 minutes for this to run. But I did it on the host set Crown Jewels because we all have host sets called Crown Jewels inside of our company. I probably should have just put file servers or something, but that's kind of funny. And then for my search, I put the process name contains .pdf.exe. The reason being, my logic behind it was, okay, the attacker, they named this malware Rakakuni, but we definitely know that the attacker is using double file extensions. So now I'm just going to go ahead and search through all of my Crown Jewels for this double file extension. Taking a look right here, I do have 3 that match that did find that double file extension. And from here, I would go ahead, check their agent events, and see just exactly what the attacker is trying to accomplish. And with that, I'll hand you back over to Nick for the Q&A. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jeff. As a reminder for everyone, Trellix Education Services offers exceptional training to go along with our award-winning products. If you would like to learn more, please visit the website listed on your screen to see all of our offerings. Now let's get our Q&A session started. I see we have several questions, but it's not too late to add your question. Please type it in the Q&A window to submit. Additionally, take a moment to fill out the survey. Your feedback and suggestions are always appreciated. How does this product work and integrate with the Trellix Endpoint Security if the Trellix agent is already installed on endpoints? Is this a separate agent as well?
Awesome. Hey, Shane, that is a great question. So it is a different product. So it is a different agent. Now, there is talk that we're going to be combining the 2 tools in the future, but I can't really speak to any more than that because I actually don't know how that's going to work in the future. Great question. Thank you, Shane.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you for that one. What is the max recommended agent event size?
So it's going to be about a half a gig of data. That's actually a terrific question. I made mention of this, but it's going to be about half a gig of data. I do see that we have another question that is also asking how far back it will go. So it's a half a gig of data depending on the system, right? So that is going to be for the past 24 hours, roughly, depending on how much information is coming in, how it's being organized, so on and so forth. So it is capped off at that. So it's not going to go over it. We don't want to take up too much space on your guys' endpoints.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that one as well. What is the ideal agent event history to keep? For example, like 1 day or 2 days?
So it is going to be, just like I was mentioning before, because it is capped off at half a gig of data, it is going to be about 1 day's worth, depending on the system. I mean, you might get 2 days, so on and so forth, but it's just going to be that half gig of data. Now, if you do perform a data acquisition, then you could pull it for every single day. That seems unnecessary. Not a lot of people do that, but that is one option that you have.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that one as well. You said that the agent events can record up to 8 areas on the Windows operating system. What can it do on the Mac operating system?
Yeah, so like I had mentioned just a few moments before, so it does those 8 areas on the Windows system. On Mac, it will record all of the same items except for the registry, because Macs don't have a registry, right? They use plist, and it will not capture URL events. Now, that's not to say that we wouldn't be able to see the URLs that Mac went to from the disk itself. This is only talking about the agent event storage, or what is nicely organized and saying this is the most relevant information for you to look at during your time of the alert.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that one. Do I still have access to the items in the agent events on the disk, or are they placed in the agent events and taken from the endpoint?
No. So they are still on the disk. And what's really nice is if there's files that have been erased from the disk, but if the attacker did write a file, we could see that in the agent events. And then if the attacker deleted that file, if we went to the disk, we wouldn't be able to see it. So it's kind of cool how it just makes a copy of what's going on, organizing it, saying, hey, these are going to be the most interesting things to look at during your time of the investigation, where everything on the disk is just left alone and it's still there, unless the attacker deleted it.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that one as well. I think the last question we've got is the Rakakuni malware from Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Yeah. I got that from the movie.
Got it. That's perfect. All right, perfect. I think that's all the questions that we have for today's session. I want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar, and a big thank you to our speakers, Jeff, John, and Mike. As a reminder, a link to today's recorded presentation will be emailed to all registered attendees. This concludes today's webinar. Stay safe, everyone.